All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Language and Literacy. This is Moving Comprehension Favorites Online. Myself and Kristine Kelly are going to be sharing with you some different activities that you can use in your online classroom to help aid comprehension of text that is read in class. This is who we are, so if you can read our bios later, but that is the people. You can put a face to the name, a face to the voice today. Our objectives today are to have you participate in several comprehension activities, okay, for online instruction. So we do ask that you have a piece of paper and a writing utensil available. We're going to be asking you to do things from the comfort of your home. And we're also going to be giving you an opportunity to reflect on those activities to see how it might fit in your classroom. I also wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge that as a community, we are finishing our 10th month of instruction that involved either complete online instruction or a mixture of hybrid or some back and forth. And I wanted to acknowledge that you have done a tremendous job. The amount of technical skills and the things that you have learned in the last 10 months to enable your students to continue learning is amazing. And since many of us are not working, daily with our colleagues, I think you need to hear that. We're not able to kind of give that feedback to one another on a regular basis. So our hope today is to be able to give you some tools to go back to your classroom and make things a little bit easier, to maybe some ideas to freshen things up, and to have some fun with reading comprehension in your class. That said, the first activity that we're going to jump in today is something called possible sentences. This comes from Bierce and Probst from a 2013 book. I like this activity. It works well for both a pre-reading and a post-reading activity. We select words from a piece of text that we're going to read, and we ask students to create a sentence based on some of those words. So they're creating a prediction on what they're going to read. After they read the text, they return, they return to those sentences, and then they look for details in the text to adjust those predictions. Okay, so we're going to try that first activity today. What I would like you to do is I have a set of words on the board that are coming from an article that we're going to read in a couple minutes. I would like you to create one sentence that contains 3 of the words below. And then in your sentence, I'm going to have you write this on a piece of paper at home. I'd like you to underline each word that you are using from the text. Okay, please write your sentences in third person. As much as we like you, the article that we're reading is not about you. So please don't write sentences that contain I, me, my, or mine, okay? But focus on more of an academic or a third person approach. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to go ahead and construct a sentence at home on a piece of paper.
And Penny, just so you know, I did shut your video off. It was freezing a lot, so we can hear you just fine and see the slides, but your video is paused.
Perfect. I noticed that. Thank you. Okay, I have a little sand timer that I'm using in an effort to slow myself down and give everybody enough time to complete the activity. On the board, I have a couple of examples of sentences that students produced for me. On our first example, Dr. Patterson is a doctor in a hospital. So this is coming from a student who was newer to class, who was kind of on the lower end of intermediate reading. And so they didn't get the 3 words in their sentence, but they were able to create a sentence, okay, and make a prediction based on what is being what we're going to read. The second sentence is an example of one from a more advanced student who was able to get the 3 words in there. The Gorilla Foundation at the San Francisco Zoo received 50,000 likes on social media. All right, so those are 2 examples of kind of activating prior knowledge or helping them make a prediction based on what they think we might be reading. Now we are going to turn to an article. We are going to chat a link to this article. The article is called Coco, and it is coming from reading worksheets. We're going to stick that link in chat. We're going to ask that if you are able to open that in a separate window to go ahead and do that. We will be referring to this piece of text for quite a few of the activities that we're using today. This is kind of our base article. So it will be helpful if you have it open in a separate window and can be referring back to that as we go through our different activities today. This is written at the lower end of the intermediate kind of spectrum, that type of thing. And I don't see the link. Can we just double check and be sure? Okay, I see Coco text, Patsy to everyone. The link is in there. If you're unable to access that link, I do have it showing on the screen as well, so you can follow along with us as we read. And to give you a chance to listen to another voice, I'm going to call on some volunteers here to help me read. Heather Yee has agreed to be one of our readers today. So Heather, when you are able and ready, you can unmute yourself, and if you want to read maybe the first column, okay, and then at that point we can find another reader, or if you want to read the entire article, you can have at it, whatever you're comfortable with. But we appreciate you joining in, and we're going to follow along as you read to us.
Okay, so I'm reading from your screen, so I will go at your, I'll just follow along with your screen. Did you know that humans aren't the only species that use language? Bees communicate by dancing, whales talk to each other by singing, and some apes talk to humans by using American Sign Language. Meet Coco, a female-born gorilla born at the San Francisco Zoo on July 4th, 1971. Coco learned sign language from her trainer, Dr. Penny Patterson. Patterson began teaching sign language to Coco in 1972, when Coco was 1 year old. Coco must have been a good student because 2 years later, she moved onto the Stanford University campus with Dr. Patterson. Coco continued to learn on the campus until 1976. That's when she began living full-time with Patterson's group, the Gorilla Foundation. Patterson and Coco's relationship has blossomed ever since. Dr. Patterson says that Coco has mastered sign language. She says that Coco knows over 1,000 words and that Coco makes up new words. For example, Coco didn't know the sign for ring, so she signaled the words finger and bracelet. Dr. Patterson thinks that this shows meaningful and constructive use of language. Not everyone agrees with Dr. Patterson. Some argue that apes like Coco do not understand the meaning of what they are doing. Skeptics say that these apes are just performing complex tricks. For example, if Coco points to an apple and signs red or apple, Dr. Patterson will give her an apple. They argue that Coco does not really know what the sign apple means. She only knows that if she makes the right motion, one which Dr. Patterson has shown her, then she gets an apple. The debate is unresolved, but one thing is for certain: Coco is an extraordinary ape.
Heather, would you like to continue or should I find another reader?
I can finish this page.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sign language isn't the only unusual thing about Coco. She's also been a pet owner. In 1983, at the age of 12, researchers said that Coco asked for a cat for Christmas. They gave Coco a stuffed cat. Coco was not happy. She did not play with it, and she continued to sign sad. So for her birthday in 1984, they let her pick a cat out of an abandoned litter. Coco picked a gray cat and named him All Ball. Dr. Patterson said that Coco loved and nurtured All Ball as though he were a baby gorilla. Sadly, All Ball got out of Coco's cage and was hit by a car. Patterson reported that Coco signed bad, sad, bad, and frown, cry, frown, sad when she broke the news to her. It seems like Patterson and Coco have a good relationship, but not everyone agrees with it. Some critics believe that Patterson is humanizing the ape. They believe that apes should be left in the most natural state possible. Even Dr. Patterson struggles with these feelings. When asked if her findings could be duplicated by another group of scientists, she said, "We don't think that it would be ethical to do again." She went on to argue that animals should not be kept in such unnatural circumstances. Nonetheless, Coco lives in her foundation today. As for the future, Dr. Patterson and the Gorilla Foundation would love to get Coco to an ape preserve in Maui, but they are having trouble securing the land. So unless you have a few $1,000,000 to spare, Coco's going to be spending her time in Woodland, California with Dr. Patterson. Coco probably doesn't mind that. If she moved to Hawaii, she'd have to give up her Facebook page and Twitter feed. And she's got like 50,000 likes. Some may deny that she knows sign language, but nobody says that she doesn't know social networking.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. I enjoy listening to you read loud expression in your voice. All right, so after we've read the text, then we're going to return. I'm going to ask you to return to that predictive sentence that you made. I'm going to ask you to rewrite it. I'm going to ask you to look for details in the text to change the details to be sure that your sentence is accurate and aligned with the details in the text. I'm going to give you a couple minutes now to go ahead and rewrite your original predictive sentence. All right, and then I'll give you a couple examples on my screen. So the students who did this activity with me, the student who was kind of my beginning level student, after reading the article and that, was able to go back and create a sentence that said, Dr. Patterson is an animal trainer who taught sign language to an ape named Coco. And another student said, Coco received 50,000 likes on social media because she is an extraordinary ape. And I saw that, I think it was Krista in the chat box is familiar with the story. And unfortunately, the gorilla named Coco did pass away a couple of years ago. But I still think this story is one of high interest. And I do know that 60 Minutes, I believe, had a video report on this. So there's other ways that you can kind of address this story, that kind of thing. What I'm going to do now is give you a moment or two to jot down some ideas about what this would look like in my class. If you have some questions, this would be a good time to chat questions about this specific activity. I like it because it combines some reading and writing. It encourages our students to make predictions. It is a nice add-on activity that I can include at the end of a fluency lesson or as part of a larger comprehension lesson. I think that there's a lot of value in it, and the prep time is quite reasonable. The prep is mostly in finding the words that would be appropriate. I would encourage you to choose words that are quite specific, like specific nouns from the article work better than general, like verbs or adverbs, that kind of thing. As far as sharing sentences go for online options, I have had students share them verbally, and I simply type what they tell me on the whiteboard. I've had them share sentences in chat. My students can, some of them know how to use the annotate tool, so they'll type it on a whiteboard, or they also have things like Jamboard or Padlets that would allow them to share sentences on an outside site.
And Penny?
Yes.
This is Kristine.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody. And while you're talking, I'm kind of adding things, some comments and things to the chat as far as some tips and things for how to use this. One question that did come up in the chat was when you ask students to rewrite their predictive sentences, do you show the chart of words again, or are students directed solely to the text?
I think that I have just directed them to the text because they're kind of rewriting, but there isn't a reason why they couldn't. Okay, I don't think there's anything wrong with showing them the set of words again, because perhaps replacing one word with another is the way to change that sentence so it's more accurate.
Yeah, we're having some comments here. Definitely, that's a scaffolding piece that you have to think about with your class. It's kind of like sometimes we add like a word box for students for an extra support, and sometimes we don't. So, and also, is it hard for people to do this on cell phones?
Notice that too. The cell phones is not, of course, an ideal thing, but it has worked, okay? Because really what we need to be able to do is we need them to be able to read text that is displayed. And the words, we can give them the words verbally, if needed over the phone. Another thing I wanted to mention is you can level this up or down. So if you are working with more of a kind of intermediate English language, class, you could certainly create this activity, but only choose like 3 or 4 words, okay? And have the words be more of tier 1 vocabulary. If you're using this in a very advanced like GED or college prep class, then you would want to pick words from the text that are certainly tier 3 words. So you can kind of level it up that way as well. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we are going to move on, but you can feel free to chat other questions and jot down any ideas that you have. Okay, a second activity that also comes from Beers and Probst that works well as a post-reading activity is the sentence frame, somebody wanted but so. It seems like a very simple activity, and it actually is, but I think there's a lot of bang for your buck in this. When you're asking students to identify somebody, you're asking them to identify the subject or the main character of a piece of text. When you ask them to identify wanted, they are required to identify an obstacle. Wanted, I'm sorry, is to identify the character's goal, but gives us the obstacle and then so indicates a cause and effect relationship. So in that one sentence, we have actually 4 different thinking skills that we can address. For very advanced students who've done this and have had some scaffolding, you can give them just the sentence frame and have them fill in the entire thing. I am still in the process of scaffolding with my students. So what I have done is I have created a couple sentence frames where I've provided some of that information for them. And then they need to use details from the text to complete. So again, I'm going to give you a little bit of time on a sheet of paper to record these 2 sentence frames and then refer back to that original text of Coco, using details to complete those sentences. I noticed in the chat that we're having some issues with my audio. I don't really know what's happening on my end. I'm not getting any kind of notices about internet lag or that, but somebody did say if my sound is not coming through as well as you would like, you can turn on the captions. You're able to still read what I'm saying, even if our sound is not perfect.
Yeah, and we hear you, Penny. It just kind of comes in and out a little bit. So thanks everyone for your patience, but it's totally workable, Penny. We're okay, but good idea about the captions.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, here's a few examples that I've gotten from my students doing this activity. Dr. Patterson wanted to keep working with Coco, but she was moving to Stanford University, so Coco also moved to campus. Coco wanted a pet, but she received a stuffed animal toy, so she ignored the toy and signed sad. Coco wanted a pet, but she didn't like her stuffed animal toy, so she received a kitten. Okay, so I think the point I want to get here is the goal of this activity is not obviously to match a duplicate to maybe a teacher's key, but there's many different ways that a person could accurately complete that sentence. Okay, so we have another opportunity here for you to jot down ideas. What could this look like in my class? Or you can chat questions or clarifications for me here. Right, Kristine is putting some nice ideas in chat about how this could work in science. I saw an idea of how this could be applied for math, kind of by changing that sentence frame a little bit. Okay, I'm going to move on to a third activity. This is an activity that I have used in my class, and it was kind of created after we moved to the new version of the tabbed test. And I saw that quite a few two-part questions. The first question asks, what is the main idea? And the second question asks, what details support the main idea? And that type of phrasing, that language was new to my students. It caused a great deal of confusion originally as to what was being asked. But I found that, again, after reading something in fluency or comprehension, I can really beef up the quality of that lesson by simply asking a sentence, what details support the idea? And then that can generate a discussion. So I would like you to write down this question at home, and we are going to then in a few minutes, we'll put you in a breakout room to discuss this with some of your colleagues. So again, having that text open in a different tab will be a benefit for this activity. Elizabeth, there's many different ways students share sentences. Sometimes I just have them tell me and I type it. Sometimes they annotate on, we use Zoom and they use a whiteboard, and they can, if I give them permission, they can type on that whiteboard. I have not used Padlet or Jamboard, but there are other options. I also have some students who simply will chat or email me their questions, and then I can copy and paste it over to the main screen. Okay, so at this point, we're going to give you about 7 minutes in a breakout room to discuss what details support the idea that Dr. Patterson's work with cocoa is controversial. So this is a text-dependent question. We are going to ask you to refer back to the text, and you can just jot down, details, words, or quotes from the text that support the idea that this was a controversial project. Okay, and I think Patsy is in the process.
If we're ready for breakouts, I will go ahead and put you in there, and we'll bring you back in just a few minutes. And those of you who are co-hosts, you will be put in a meeting room. You're welcome to just leave it once you're in there. All right, here you are.
Okay. So you've had an opportunity to discuss this with some colleagues, to refer back to the text. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to kind of check your notes against what I found. Again, the goal is not to necessarily duplicate what a teacher finds or a teacher key, but that there's a lot of value in that conversation. Kind of thinking and discussing those details. If you found a detail, something that is not on my screen, please feel free to chat that, and I can adjust that for future, that type of thing.
And just a reminder that your videos are often on when you come back from a breakout. If you would just turn those off for us. Thank you.
Okay, this is also an opportunity for you to jot down any notes about what this could look like in your classroom, to put any questions regarding that in chat for me. I like using this activity both in person and then using that breakout room feature. I think anytime that we can get our students an opportunity to have what is, Patsy's done research in something called academic conversations, but being able to communicate and talk about their ideas and why they think that, and then backing up those ideas by referring to details in the text. I think there's a lot of value in the activity and the opportunity for them to communicate and learn from one another goes a long way in maintaining the classroom community, which encourages them to keep coming back for future classes. Susan, tomorrow I am running a session on putting the R in RLA, and it's possible that some of those activities might help address your question about helping students identify evidence and supporting answers. I have a few other ideas. That's something that I've been experimenting with. So I would encourage you to stop by there if you have the time for that. Yes, I think this works well with the chat feature, especially if students are on phones. You know, I know when they're limited to a phone or even an iPad, that does throw some glitches into the online instruction there. You have to kind of modify around that. The intermediate ELL, that is not the level that I teach, but I think this could also be done with a picture prompt by putting a picture up and asking students a question, you know, what details support the idea that these people value the environment, okay, or that these people this woman has had a hard day. I think if you use a picture prompt rather than text, you could still use that phrasing of what details support for people who are developing their language skills at a different level. Okay, we're going to move on to one final activity then here. So in the most recent survey of STAR participants, one of the needs that was identified was finding text to work on the various comprehension strategies that are taught in evidence-based reading instruction. So we're going to use this as an opportunity to revisit 5WH. 5WH is one of the strategies. So as opposed to just an activity that you use in class, the strategy is developing thinking skills among your students that they can take and transfer to other texts. So ultimately, the hope is that they will not be dependent on the teacher to help unlock that comprehension, but they're being given the tools to do that, okay, on their own. 5WH is encouraging students to ask questions about text and then look for details that answer those questions. If you're working with a lower level group, I would suggest picking just one or two of those boxes and maybe focusing on just who or what, okay, on a given day. And then on a different day, maybe you focus on the when and the where questions. For more advanced students, I also like to add on a question that starts with S. I would encourage you to also ask them, so what? By asking, so what, we're encouraging the students to think about the quality of the text. Why is the text important? How would that apply to our daily lives, you know, beyond the classroom? And I think adding that S question helps them get into the higher order thinking skills of evaluating the quality of the text as well. So again, I'm just checking my time here. I'm going to give you, I'm going to say about 5 minutes. I know you probably won't complete the entire graphic organizer in 5 minutes, but I'll give you about 5 minutes to refer back to the text, and on a piece of paper at home, go ahead and jot down these questions and jot down some details. And the purpose really in having you take some time to actually do this activity as a student is I really want you to reflect on what parts of this activity might be difficult for your students, what parts of the activity would be fairly easy, where would they need support, where can they do this more independently. Okay, so again, about 5 minutes to just work at home, filling in this graphic organizer. Again, the S question that I tack on for my more advanced students is the question, so what? Okay. I agree, Rita. Once these notes are filled in, it does work really well as a way to which details should go in a summary and which are minor details. Yep, it works well for that.
I was just going to say something about Rita's suggestion. Summarizing is one of the toughest things we will ever ask our students to do. So any kind of graphic organizer or any scaffolds that we can use to help them is really valuable.
Patsy, can you put the link for the Cocoa text back in the box? I sure can. It's also in everyone's participant folder, but don't navigate there now if you haven't been there yet. I can certainly grab it for you. Just one moment. All right, here's that text. Let me know if that doesn't open.
Michael, I agree. There are a lot of details that would work in more than one box. So certain details answer what happened in the text, but they can also answer the question, how, okay, how they happened. So again, it's helping students understand that there's a lot of flexibility in this. It's not such a black and white or right or wrong activity, but the process is more in identifying details and thinking about the text. The value is in the thought process. So Krista, I noticed that you have a question there about using sentence frames with the kind of with the level of students that you have, kind of that intermediate ELL. That again is not the level that I typically teach at, but I can kind of answer, like if I was in that situation, kind of what I would try to do. I think the first thing I would do is in using sentence frames, I would try to match the sentence structure to what I'm using in my grammar lessons. So if there's a particular type of, sentences or questioning that I'm using in grammar, I would try to use a sentence structure that ties into there. I would begin with maybe simpler sentences and perhaps giving them the entire sentence except for one word. Okay, and maybe a very nice beginning point is to really just find the one word, maybe the who in that sentence structure. And then with time, perhaps have them fill in more. My response again is not based on practice or necessarily research, but if I was in your situation, I think that's what I would try. If there are other people in our room who's kind of specialize with that high intermediate ELL and have some experience with using the sentence stems and sentence frames, so I'd really appreciate you chiming in if you have any perspective for Krista on that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to share kind of what I jotted down when I did this activity. Keep in mind that the goal of this activity is not to match what I have on the screen by any means. We did have a discussion in chat box of showing kind of how the what and the how questions can often like intersect, or details can work in more than one. This is not an exhaustive list. There's certainly other details that we could have added to the text, but I'll just give you a moment to kind of check what you have against mine. And in class, I feel like this is often where a lot of the really good learning occurs, because somebody will say, well, I put this detail in the why, and this is the reason I think it belongs there. And another student said, well, I put it in the what, and I think that this is the reason why it belongs there. I think there's a lot of value in having those conversations where people don't necessarily see eye to eye. I think it's also important to note that it is particularly acceptable to have situations where one of these boxes don't receive any notes at all. Okay, so I did find something that I thought would work for how, but that certainly would work very well in the what column. So have the text drive the discussion, not the graphic organizer. My students fall into the trap of very much feeling like that graphic organizer is carved in stone and there's no room for modification whatsoever. Let them know that it's okay to have a blank box or to modify a graphic organizer to fit the text, okay? Because it's about the text, not filling in the chart. Okay. Then we have just another minute or two here. Again, jot down any notes about what could this look like in my class. You can share some ideas or questions. I know Kristine had a comment that she wanted to address from the chat box, so it'd be a good opportunity for that right now.
Yeah, one thing I just want to quickly highlight is what you said, Penny, the conversations, like, why did you put this here? Why did if a student, if two students put something in different places, asking them to defend why they put things where they did, because those are those making thinking visible conversations. And those are so important so that students can kind of see, different ways of approaching this activity or of thinking, and those can be more valuable than any right answer. And what I wanted to say is I wanted to address, because I've been thinking a lot about this with my colleague Lindsay Poost, the idea of questions, and students struggle endlessly with questions. Even my GED students, they struggle endlessly with questions that ask them to make inferences, because they go into the text and they expect to find the answer, and they don't realize that the question is actually a think and search, or an author and me, where yes, I have to use information that's in the text, but I also have to use something from my own head. And so it's really important to work with students on understanding what questions are asking. I know one of the things that Lindsay has been doing is having students look at questions they're supposed to be answering, and then actually categorize them into what questions they would rather skip, or what questions are tougher for them and what are easier for them, and then starting to analyze the types of questions that individual students and then the group are having trouble understanding, and then going from there. So there's a lot of really cool work to do with questions, because they struggle. And I often tell students, it's not that you don't know the answer, it's just that you don't necessarily understand the question that you're being asked. So, so yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Let's take another moment or two to jot down any ideas, or to chat any kind of questions or clarifications that you have. Okay, then that is going to bring us, we are going to take a break, a 10-minute kind of stretch break. And then when you come back, Kristine is going to lead you through a couple of favorite activities, and how she has used that, used some technology and that kind of thing, to turn those into activities for an online classroom. Okay, I think we can start the break timer at this point, and I'm still available if you have questions for me on chat.
Okay, I'll go ahead and pause the recording if you want to hit play on the timer.
Okay.
And we'll see you back here in 10 minutes, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I always talk about how I like to use timers with activities with students. They like the timers as well. It helps them get a sense of time, and helps them prioritize when they realize they're running out of time. And just beware, they're easy to insert into slides. You can just, if you're doing a Google slide deck, you can go up to insert video, and in the search bar, you can just put 5-minute timer, or you could put 10-minute timer snow, or fall leaves. But some of them have really loud noises at the end. So if you're sharing sound from your computer, it happened to my students where like these sirens started going off and I didn't realize it, and it just scared all of us. And so just be aware of what happens at the end of the timer. So welcome back, and thanks to Penny. I love watching Penny's presentations because I learn a lot of really great things. And also thank you for the ideas you're putting in the chat box. Just as a reminder, presenting, it has a lot of advantages, and one of the advantages is presenters get a lot of ideas from participants that we then take and happily use in our own classrooms. So thank you for your suggestions and reminders about things. So here I am, and I'm going to talk about 2 strategies. One I've talked about before for in-person classes. It's called Chalk Talk. And when Penny asked me to present, it challenged me to think about how I could use some of the strategies, number one, in an online environment, and also how I could more strongly connect, particularly this Chalk Talk strategy, take it one step further to really connect it into a comprehension activity. This is often used as a pre-reading activity, but using it as a pre-reading activity and then having students go back and working in a concrete comprehension activity. So we are going to jump in and do some chalk talk. So chalk talk is, it's a pre-reading, and I'm adding that it's a post-reading activity, although you could use it for students to reflect on something, where students engage in a written conversation. So I'm always looking for ways to work writing in with the reading, because that connection is so important. The writing practice is important, and I'm going to show you how students can do that in a context that's familiar to them, as far as communicating, commenting, liking or not liking posts. It really works well as a pre-reading activity to kick off, like if you're going to do something with multiple texts around an essential question. I'm going to give you an example. Chalk talk can be used with one text or even more generalized statements for students to respond to. Students can share their opinions and interact in writing in person with other students and what other students are writing. But they can also go back and they can use evidence from the text to add to their responses or to clarify some things. So that's chalk talk. And chalk talk is an activity that's generally done in person. I have a picture here of my students doing a chalk talk. And what I do is whatever the topic has to be, this one happened to be kids and social media. And I had, I think I had 5 flip charts. Each flip chart sheet had a statement, a general statement on it, just to get students thinking about where they and others in the class were as far as this idea of kids and social media. And so what students do is they can respond and they can agree with a statement, they can disagree, they can add to someone else's statement, they can pose a question to a student, they can make connections and draw arrows between their thought and another student's thought, but it's a written silent dialogue. Not in class right now, and I'm not face-to-face with my students. So thinking about how I could do this using Padlet. And Padlet is something some of you may have used, some of you may not have used. It can look a little complicated. My students, with just a couple just pieces of instruction, got right onto Padlet. There are different formats you can use with Padlet. The one I most like to use is one where they are responding like a social media thread, because that's something that they're used to doing. So I'm setting up like this would be an essential question. Like I'm going to have students read multiple texts on pros and cons of learning remotely at home, ways that we can be successful. And my sample essential question is, how can we be successful learning remotely from home? So the idea is that students are going to gather evidence from text, that might be video or print. They're going to develop some knowledge and keep track using, I sometimes use a graphic organizer or something where we can keep track of the evidence we're gathering about strategies and best practices. And then they're going to need to produce some kind of a summative assessment task. So they're going to write a short essay, or for some of my students, a paragraph is a good challenge. Maybe put together a little oral presentation, maybe a personal plan for remote learning based on what they learn. So in order to get there, we're going to kick it off with some statements. Now, this is a conversation in writing, and so students have to have some writing skill. And what they get is they get a series of statements. Here's an example of a statement, and I just want to draw your attention, for those of you who are not familiar with Padlet, to a couple things. So you can upvote or downvote a comment. I have this set up anonymously. I will do that with students. Sometimes I will have them identify themselves depending on what we're doing, something like this. It's okay for them to be anonymous. They're used to liking. You can also set it up to like click the heart if you like it. So students are really familiar with this format. You can comment directly on a statement. So here's the statement. You can add your comment down here. In addition, if you're like, you know what, I want to bring up just something that I want people to comment on related to this, you can click on this plus button and you can create a separate comment that then people can start to respond to. So it works very much like social media, where people can comment, people can like or dislike something. We don't get to necessarily draw connections like we can draw arrows and things on the flip chart paper, but students can at least say I agree, or they can make a comment where they disagree, or they can add to. Now, as my students work on using the academic language of you can decide to do it to that extent where students are working with some sentence frames, or you've been working with them like, I disagree because, or I agree, but, or I would like to add. And this is important academic language. It really depends where your students are. I've done it where I ask students to use academic language structures to practice, and I've done it where it's like, just write, right? I mean, just get your ideas out because of the value of that in writing. So I am going to okay, so this is what the Padlet looks like, and I'm going to have you go to this Padlet, but hold on. So Patsy is going to put a link in the chat box, but also for any of you who are used to using QR codes, I think Apple users, it automatically comes on your phone. I don't know about Android users. It's just as a tip here, sometimes our students, or often our students, are used to using QR codes. They're used to taking their phone and zapping that code somewhere out in the store, in print materials, etc. So I'm starting to use that as an option. I still use a link, but I have students who are like, great, I'll just take my phone and just zap that, and it'll take it, they can go to the page or whatever, whether it's a text I want them to go to or an online tool. So we're going to go to Padlet. And we are going to spend, I'm going to give 8 minutes just because there are a lot of us. There are 5 statements. You do not have to comment on all 5 statements, okay? I would give a little bit more time perhaps to students, but here, because there are a lot of us, and I've used Padlet in a session with up to 200 people. So this, and I don't think any of us have 200 students right now. So choose a couple statements maybe, and then keep an eye on other statements that people are making or comments, and try to go in and respond to 1 or 2. So I'm going to go live just for a moment here. And we are live, so I can go, oh, I see there's upvotes, but I do require that students have to make at least a comment too, because it's really easy for them to upvote to a point. But now somebody might want to ask, I might say, explain this. Okay, so I want you to go in and I want you to play a little bit, and I want you to leave some comments. You can also pose questions. You know, we can always go back in a class. We can go back to answering some of those questions. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to set my timer. And go ahead, Patsy is definitely familiar with Padlet. So if you have a tech question about Padlet, please post it in the chat box. Otherwise, I know that lots of you are upvoting and downvoting. So practice that, and then leave some comment. You might agree, you might disagree. You might say this is true, but also there's any number of things.
All right, so I'm seeing a lot of activity in there. We did have one question while people are navigating to it, Kristine, as to whether this is available in Google Classroom. Can you speak to that?
I'm not sure if it's I have used it connected to my Google Classroom. So what I've done is I have you know, I'll be doing my Zoom class synchronously. If I want it to be part of homework where students have a chance to think about it and it's not right on the spot, I will include the Padlet link in a posting on my thread or as part of an assignment that I post on Google Classroom.
Thank you. Lots of activity, lots of stuff happening in there, and it's fun to see it popping up in real time. You might want to refresh your screens if you haven't in a little while on the Padlet so you can see what's emerged.
I'm actually going to go here to the live look. One drawback is they can like, or they can upvote or downvote the main comments or statements, but not necessarily other comments. There are some limitations, but it is a great way for students to engage with each other and do some writing and start to see kind of what they know or what they think about a topic. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you saw it, Kristine, but Michael just shared some info on how you can get that, a screenshot of how you can add it to a Google Classroom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Michael. I see the question, I'm a little overwhelmed with 5 questions. Absolutely. You can certainly start out smaller. You could start out with a couple questions. You can require students to tell them they don't have to focus on all the statements. You can really adjust it. And in fact, when I first started with Padlet, I had 2 statements so students could go back and forth. Padlet also shows up very well on phones. But again, adjust to your students. In the beginning, just to practice responding and doing this activity with 1 or 2 statements is a great place to start. I'm going to take a peek at my time here. Oh, I shut the timer off. I think I'll probably give it just a couple more minutes. Get your last comments in there. Hmm. I think I'm going to give it just 1 more minute. Okay, as I tell my students, if you are in the middle of a thought, typing a thought, please finish your thought. And I am going to just make a few comments on some things. Sometimes it takes students a little bit to get going. One thing to really help them understand is that this is not a grammar activity, okay? This is not about writing perfect answers. So when I talk about, there's different kinds of writing activities. One is to practice language conventions. And to practice coherent writing. One is to reflect and express and get ideas out. This can be difficult. Most of my students are advanced ELLs, and sometimes I have to break them out of it. Like, this isn't, it's about what you think. And one student actually said yesterday to me, she said it took her a while to understand. Now she said, I give you what I have in my head. And that was about one of the coolest things I've ever heard from a student. But it took her some time to get there. So it's not about spelling everything correctly and writing in complete sentences. That's important for students to understand. So there's lots of things coming out here. And again, these are just statements. These statements aren't necessarily true or false. They're statements to think about. I see a comment here about writing down all the tasks. Somebody commented, I don't do this, and I wouldn't expect my ELs to. Absolutely. I don't do this either. Or into students are responsible for minimizing distractions. You know, what a great way as they're looking at each other's comments and being reminded again that their classmates are in very different situations, right? Some have kids, pets, yes, my pets. They're in situations, they're living in places they have no control. So it is a good reminder, and it's a great start for students. Sometimes I will have students spend some time looking and see if we can't pull some trends in thinking out. Like, where does it seem like there are some ways of agreeing or disagreeing with statements that the group seems to be making? Again, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just getting some reflection out there. And Patsy says, students can access the Padlet anytime, so the conversation could stretch over several days, weeks even. That is absolutely true. And one thing that my students are still working on is moving between tabs. Okay, so sometimes they get into the Padlet and then they're like, I don't know how to get back to the slide deck, so just beware of that. Okay, we are going to go to the next slide here. So you got a little taste of Padlet. Lots of different ways to set up a Padlet. I have done this where comprehension questions have been up one at a time, and students could respond and then add on to each other's ways of thinking and providing evidence from the text, lots of things. But then I was challenged, like, how can I make this really a comprehension activity and use what we generated? And I thought, you know what? Then what I need to do is I need to provide them with a text. And the text, in this case, is a text about some tips for building motivation or helping you be more successful online. So the statements that I put up, several of them are ideas from this text. And the goal then is to have students read the text, or we can read it together. 6 ways to build motivation to do your schoolwork, and then prepare to discuss how the text supports or opposes each statement that we had on Padlet. So Patsy put the link to the text, 6 ways to build motivation. This is from a site. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. I stumbled on it. It's called Actively Learn. Now, it is a pay site for some things. It's like Newsela as far as there's a lot of stuff and free text that are available without any more than just a free login. The nice thing about these is these are also licensed, that you can take and duplicate these texts in any way that you want, as long as you attribute where it came from. I often use excerpts. They have current events, they have short stories, they have all kinds of things. So that's Actively Learn. So what I want you to do is take a look at this text. I put 4 minutes up. I think you can scan it because I want you to be able to do the actual activity or try the activity. I've got, again, some sentence frames for you. So let's take 4 minutes or so and access the text and go ahead And again, it's also in your participant folder. Patsy's posting links. And go ahead and read through this document and be thinking about, and I'm going to actually put this up here. I should have put my timer on the next one. I want you to be thinking about these statements while you're reading, and if the text has any evidence that supports or opposes or clarifies even any of these statements, okay? So let's take 3 or 4 minutes to look at the text. I'm going to give you 1 more minute. I would give students longer, or we might work through this together. We might read it aloud together. Especially if the text is above students, most of the students, a little bit above their instructional level, but they understand when they hear more than they understand when they read. So you absolutely can adjust that. Often what I will do with this is it won't all happen in one sitting. So for example, we might do the Padlet together synchronously in class and talk a little bit about that. And then I might post the text and this sentence frame as an assignment in my Google Classroom so that students have some time to work with the text and they have some time to think about how to answer the question. And I may say, I want you to do this 2 or 3 times, or to address 2 or 3 statements, however many statements I have or want them to do. And then for the next class, when they join, they've got something to talk about, and they've got something, you know, they've had some luck with the text. Yes, I absolutely have new students coming all the time. And the question is, do students do the homework? I'd say I think I've got 16 students right now, and 8 or 9 of them regularly do the homework, and the other ones don't, but that's no different than when they're in person. So you can separate this or design this how you want. You could also put them into small breakout groups to talk about and to come up with a small group. Pick a couple statements and finish this off. So there's a lot of things you can do, but what this does, of course, is it connects it to a text, and it actually has students use evidence from the text. Yes, they gave their ideas and their opinions about these statements. What does the text say? And does evidence in the text support or oppose a particular statement, and why? And I also I number my paragraphs. Thank you, Laura. Yes, I haven't noticed any difference in homework. Actually, more students are doing homework now virtually than they did in person. So I don't know how to attribute that. So there are different ways to use this, but I think what's key is it's a great pre-reading activity, but how can you bring in a comprehension piece? And one of the things, as far as using the Padlet, just as a side note, that when I first started teaching online, I was like, how can I take what I'm doing in person and take all the things I have already created and make it work online? And I tried that, and I got really, really frustrated with that. So I started thinking about what the goal was for certain tasks that I had for students. And then I got to know some tools, and then I would sit down with the tool and go, how can I use this tool to get at the goal? That's helped me a lot better than trying to take things and make a tool try to work for it, but thinking about what the tool does and the ultimate goal of the task, and then designing it in the tool. But the ultimate goal, of course, this is one activity, and we would do some other texts as well, and we would gather some evidence. And again, I would probably give students options, like you can write about, like, what advice would you give for somebody using evidence that we've learned about strategies for being successful. If students want to create a personal plan, like, I've learned that these are things I need to do that work for me, and why, and connect some evidence to that. So these are just, this is just one example of how to do something like Chalk Talk. So please go ahead and post what this could look like. Certainly, I know that, again, depending on the students, depending on their experience with the technology, you could do some of these things in one synchronous class, or break it up and give them time to think and read the text, and do it more blended. And so lots of ideas, I think. So go ahead and put in the chat any questions you have, or what that might be able to look like. And I've presented on this one as well. This is, could this be done in the chat? I'm just looking at the chat box. Sure. I think that, I think especially that part where they have to answer, or where they have to use the sentence frame about how the text opposes or supports, that would be a great thing to put in the chat. Absolutely. I used to think, now I think, and we're actually going to have you do this today, based on what we've shared, and the text that we've shared with the slide deck and orally with ideas, and basically to show some comprehension. And I love this strategy. This is such a great formative assessment strategy. It can be quick. You can do it in different ways. Obviously, in person, I project this up on the smart board. It's really easy for students to do in the chat box. You can use something like a Jamboard or a Padlet. You can have students just verbally write it down and then verbally respond. They can write it down if we don't have time, and they can take a picture of it and text me. And there's lots of things we can do. But the key here is it's a strategy for students to reflect on a change in thinking due to something that they've read or evidence, or heard in a video or done in an activity. And you can do two things here. You can either do, I used to think, now I think, or a variation of this is to do, I used to think, then, and sometimes I will say, then this happened, and then they write, now I think. And one of the reasons, I'll use the one with then, especially if we are digging into where our opinions come from, where our beliefs come from when we're doing some of that critical thinking. And what are the types of things that tend to change our minds? So students have to do a little bit of reflection, like, I used to think this, then a student in the class, shared this story. Now I think, so hearing people's personal experiences, what we read or the video, the example was great, just different, looking at the different ways that that our opinions can change. So you can do one or the other, and you can do it even more structured if you want them to reflect on something very specific, or if you want them to reflect like near the end of a unit of instruction or something. I used to think about this topic, now I think. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of the strategies you've learned about today, Penny's strategies, my couple of strategies, and complete the following sentence frames. I used to think blank about teaching comprehension online. Now I think blank. I didn't use the then variation, but what I would like you to do is take a moment and think, and I would love it if some of you would add your reflections to the chat box. So I used to think blank about teaching comprehension online. Now I think blank. Penny or Patsy, you want to give it a try?
Yep, I've got one going into chat right now, Kristine.
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to do it orally or in chat. Great.
I can do it orally. And this is less about online, but more about kind of my comprehension before and after having gone through STAR training. I think in my early days of teaching, I used to think that teaching comprehension was about having students answer questions. Okay. Now I think that teaching comprehension is teaching students to develop thought processes. Okay, so they can independently unlock the text. So teaching strategies rather than answering questions.
I might say I used to think that it was a big challenge to add writing when teaching comprehension online. Now I think the online environment gives us more opportunities at times to include writing with the reading.
Great, we've got a couple contributions from our friends Becky and Abby, who came in first. I bet Abby would speak up.
So hopefully you're getting a chance to read some of the statements. I used to think teaching comprehension online was more limited. And the great thing about this session is we've shown you things that you can definitely do online, and any of these things work, face to face as well. So, and that doesn't always work the same way, the other way. I love this. It was vague and overwhelming. Teaching comprehension was vague and overwhelming. Now I think I have specific things to guide students. I love this one. I used to think students didn't understand because I judged their body language on the video. Now I think they can demonstrate their comprehension in a variety of ways. I saw that Patsy made that that comment about one of the things that something like Padlet or Jamboard allows students to do, or the chat box, is more reserved students can participate or may feel more comfortable participating, particularly if you set things up for anonymity. We're finding at Robbinsdale that there are some students who normally were very quiet in class, and online they are participating gangbusters. So yes, I used to think it was more about teaching vocab and repetition. Now it's got some different ideas here. It can be more effective using different ways of student engagement. Proper scaffolding and visual clues, it is more readily applicable for level 1 and level. Absolutely. There's a number of ways you can scaffold. You can limit these activities. You can change and support students. Teaching comprehension online was dependent on me explaining things. Now I think they can learn from each other's insights. And this is something that taking advantage of, yes, students have to bring a lot more independent skills to the online environment, in my opinion. And using this as an opportunity to help students do some more of that heavy lifting and creating some of, or strengthening some of those independent learning skills. It would be hard to access, but now I think activities are part of assessment. And like somebody wanted, but so Penny's example, like this one, I used to think it's something you can do for formative assessment. And it is important because the students get to reflect and you can see where they're at. Don't underestimate the power of using even one sentence frame or strategy. Make it part of the class where students have to reflect on something, either their progress on a learning target, something knowledge they've gained from that particular class, how they did doing a process, how did I, the who, what, where, when, why, how questions, where they have to write, which question they found hardest to answer and why they thought, maybe the how question. Let's see, teaching comprehension online takes really good technology skills. And I do think technology is absolutely. And, that's why I usually use I use Menti, Padlet, and Flippity, especially where students can drag things. And this is pretty much where I stay. There are lots of other great tools out there, but I kind of had to limit and teach students. And now the core students understand how to use these 3 tools. So they beat me to it. A student says, how do I do this? And I have another student say, oh, you just need to do this. All right. It was about recreating what was done in the in-person classroom. Yeah. You get limited. Like, how do you use what's available to you and how do you build? And this is last comment I'm going to make here. And then I'm going to turn to Penny here. I think that now I lost my train of thought. That never happens to me. I'm not used to being like the first session. I'm used to being put like after lunch and at the end of the conference because I'm just, have so much energy. But yeah, it's really about, we have to be careful to not judge what we've done in the spring and the summer when we were in crisis mode. Like we all, or those of us who had to go online or to packets. I mean, we were moving as fast as we could to help students feel connected. That's different from having time to thoughtfully design, which a lot of us still don't have because we don't have prep time, or because we're working from home and we have distractions, or, you know, we've got students who don't have technology. I mean, this idea that we would have time given to us to dedicate to thoughtfully designing online I mean, that's almost crazy talk, right? But it is a different way of thinking about it. All right. Thank you for adding your reflections quickly. Again, you can do this with a structured prompt to get students thinking about a particular topic, like I gave you a little more structure about specifically teaching comprehension online. Or you can do this activity open-ended, and students can discuss any change at all in what they're thinking about a topic. And it's a lot more open-ended. So definitely in the chat, you can share any questions, any ideas about how you might use something like this. Again, these single statements to use with students are powerful because it also shows students their progress. Like, okay, so my thinking is changing and this is why. Okay, we are almost to the end. Penny, do you want to say anything about your session tomorrow anymore? Because I know you're going to be doing more work with comprehension and putting the R in RLA.
Yeah, I think we're a little ahead on time here. So if you
Not much.
I'll take share screen if you want to go off screen, and we can preview this and then we'll be able to wrap stuff up.
Okay, so go ahead. I'm going to stop share and go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, yep. So one of the things about presenting online is it is a little harder to judge pacing and that kind of thing. And so we are ever so slightly ahead of schedule. So I'm just going to give you a preview of something that we're going to look at for those people who join me tomorrow. We're going to look at one of the things that I have liked about online teaching is it's given me the motivation to bring in more outside speakers, and I do that via TED Talks, okay? So TED Talks allows you to go in and decide how long of a talk you want, so you can have talks that are under 6 minutes. The majority of those TED Talks have transcripts that you can then turn into an activity. So one of the activities that I've used is a true story. They've interviewed the gentleman who is the subject of the boy who harnessed the wind. And then I took the text and I put it on a document. I'm not particularly fond of sort of the layout of this is sort of the best I can do with Google Docs. So they have the transcript on the first 2 columns, and then a false statement in the 3rd column. And then my students have to go back into the transcript, find the text to refute that false statement. And I'll give you an example here of what the key looks like. Again, we're going to look at this in depth tomorrow. But just one little extra bonus activity for you. If you have a little bit of time to create something, I'd encourage you to look at TED Talks. There's a wealth of information there where we can bring in listening skills connected to the reading skills. So I think that's kind of all I really wanted to do there. So at this point, either that particular activity with TED Talks or really just any other questions. We have about 5 minutes left to go here. So any other questions or clarifications that you have for us, feel free to put that in the chat box.
I see a question here about the 3 sites that I use. I use Padlet, I use Flippity, and I use Mentimeter. I often use Mentimeter for easy formative assessment or to do like a polling question. And please go ahead and email me it's in the slide deck, or you can go to Atlas and find me, the Atlas page, and find me, and I'm happy to share some examples with you. Flippity is something that I was introduced to from Lynx and Susan Finn Miller, and there are all these different templates. The one I like is where you can easily create it on a spreadsheet and students can drag things around. Like right now, my students are taking definitions and academic vocabulary words, and I'm timing them on this particular activity, and they have to drag the word over the definition. And it's like when they have to move things around in class, they like it a lot, and you can do a lot of things with it. So go ahead and email me if you have any questions. We're pretty much right on time, Penny. Do you want to say anything about the resources? the resource list?
I'd like to talk about Padlet for just a moment. On Tuesday, this past Tuesday, I used Padlet for the first time in my classes. I wanted to be able to dig into the poem of The Hill We Climb. So we listened to the recitation of that, and then because poetry is so dense and the meaning can fly over, our heads so easily, I took a few lines from the poem and I put it on a Padlet, and then I asked my students to, questions to respond to it. First thing is less is more. I think I had 8 things, so it was a little overwhelming. So edit and try and pick things that way. My first class, I had only 1 student show up that day in the morning, because that's what happens when you create something exciting. But we went ahead and we did that. We had a conversation, and at the end she said, I really liked it because it gave me time to think. Where when you're having an oral conversation, there's that pressure to give an immediate response. Then used it in my evening class where I had 16 students show up that night, and really liked that some students that often get drowned out in it, whether it's an in-person class or, students who are still working on really processing English and don't respond just automatically. They had an opportunity to really express themselves. So I will be using Padlet in the future.
And one suggestion, if I can make I
found it fairly easy to set. Yeah. Go ahead, Kristine.
Oh, sorry, you were kind of breaking up a little bit. This is also something that you could do across classes as well. You could share the Padlet, and it could be a way for students to connect to other classes. Like if I wanted to do this with the evening class that my colleague John Troyertola does, his reading and writing class, it would be a way to connect, or different levels. But there are several formats, and the best thing to do is get in and play with these tools, play with them, and they're gonna go wonky at times when you're doing it live, but I think we've all learned that our students have a lot of patience, and they also need to see us not be perfect. Like my students feel better, like, okay, Kristine totally talked for 1 minute and didn't unmute herself. I can feel okay not being comfortable with the technology because Kristine isn't all that comfortable always either. It's a human thing, and I think it's good for them to see that we're all learning this.
Well, I think we can wrap things up. We'll be available for a couple more minutes. You certainly can email us with questions. My goal in presentations is that people leave with something they can use in my classroom. So that's my hope, that you got something that you'll be able to use. We thank you for joining us, and keep doing the wonderful work that you're doing in your classroom. You guys are amazing at what you've done in the last 10 months.
Great, thank you so much. I'll just add my thanks to Penny and Kristine. Thank you for being here. The next session begins at 11:30, and I've just chatted out the link to the flyer in the push notification you got in your email. There's also a copy of that flyer. If one is jammed up because of too much traffic, you can use the alternate copy to navigate to your next session. Thank you so much. I'll end the recording here.